The first time a client looked up during Freefall and started screaming, I was 11 seconds into descent and I assumed it was the harness. People panic, the buckle pinches under the armpit, or the helmet shifts, or the cold hits them in a way they didn't expect and they make a noise. That's normal. You log it and keep counting altitude. This wasn't that. The man on my chest was 47, a hedge fund executive from Greenwich who'd paid $18,000 for a sunrise tandem out of a twin otter 12,500 feet above the dry lake north of Tonopah. He had on the company goggles, the company gloves, the company jumpsuit. He smelled like aftershave and salt. He'd been quiet on the climb. A lot of them get quiet. The richer they are, the quieter they get, because the money stops insulating them at altitude and they have to sit with their own bodies for 15 minutes for maybe the first time in years. You can hear it in their breathing. His breathing had been fine until 11 seconds in. Then his neck snapped back against my collarbone. I felt the helmet hit me. I felt his whole spine go rigid the way bodies do when they cramp, and then he started making a sound I have never heard another human being make. And I worked 4 years as a corpsman in the Navy, and I have heard people make a lot of sounds. It wasn't a scream. A scream has shape. A scream rises and falls, and you can tell what part of the throat it's coming from. This was flat. It was the same pitch for the entire length of the freefall, like a tone being held by an instrument. And the only reason it sounded human at all was that it kept getting interrupted by him trying to breathe in. He'd gulp at the air and then go right back to the tone. I did not look up. I want to be very clear about that. But when the videographer caught up to us on the 4 o'clock and angled in to get the client's face, I saw the client's visor in my peripheral vision, and there was something in it. The visor is curved. It reflects the sky above. What I saw in his visor was a shape that was not the plane, and was not the videographer, and was not any cloud I had ever seen, and the shape was below the upper edge of the reflection, which meant whatever made the shape was lower than the aircraft we had jumped out of. I told myself I was wrong. I had to. Because if I wasn't wrong, then something had already fallen past us. There was nothing else to tell myself at 4,000 feet, with a man going rigid against me and the desert coming up fast. I pulled the drogue. I pulled the main at 4,000 because I wasn't going to waste a second on the canopy check. The chute opened clean. The roar of the air through my helmet died in less than a second. There was a small pop, and then there was nothing, the way the world goes when you walk into a sealed room from a freeway. We swung. He stopped making the noise the moment the harness yanked us upward, like something had let go. We landed soft. He was conscious. He walked to the van under his own power. He never spoke again. Not to me, not to the medics, not to his wife when she flew in from Connecticut 3 days later. He just sat in the lobby of the lodge and stared at his hands. The company paid for a private clinic in Henderson and a non-disclosure agreement so thick it had its own table of contents. And a week later, there was no record he had ever been on the manifest. The rule was the first thing they taught us. You do not look above the jump line once descent begins. You keep your eyes on the altimeter, on the horizon, on the client's hands. You can look down. You can look at the desert coming up at you. You cannot look up. The training video explains it like this. There should never be another silhouette above the jump line once descent begins. If you see one, you are confused. The atmosphere plays tricks. The brain is not built for vertical motion at terminal velocity and will manufacture shapes to compensate. Looking up encourages this. Looking up is dangerous because it disorients the inner ear. Looking up causes asymmetric drag, which is true, sort of, in the same way that breathing causes asymmetric drag. They had a slide for it. They had a corporate font for it. They had a man in a clean shirt who looked into the camera and said in a calm voice, "We ask all team members to keep their gaze level or downward at all times during descent. It is a small habit. It will become natural. It is for everyone's safety." The video was 34 minutes long. The rule about looking up took 90 seconds. The rest of the video was about crosswinds and altimeter calibration and how to detach from a client whose harness fails. The crosswind section was longer than the looking up section. I noticed this the first time I watched it. I noticed it the second time too. I have watched that video probably 40 times in 5 years, and I have never seen them put more than 90 seconds into the rule that they enforce more strictly than any other rule the company has. The company is called Apex Vertical. We operate out of a private strip about 30 miles north of Tonopah. It is off a county road that doesn't have a number, just a gate and a guardhouse and a sign that says private property in letters that don't try to be friendly. The strip itself is 2 pavement runways, 3 hangars, a maintenance shed, a fuel farm, a lodge with 16 suites, and a small office building where the manifests live. The restaurant flies in oysters from San Francisco twice a week. We do business with 18 to 20 clients a month. The average package is $40,000. The most expensive is $120,000, which gets you a halo-style jump from 25,000 feet with oxygen, a private debrief with a former Air Force jump instructor, and a custom video edit with a soundtrack of your choosing. The airspace we operate in is restricted. Most of central Nevada is. We sit in a corner that is technically civilian but borders 3 military training areas, and we have an arrangement with the Air Force that none of us has ever read. The arrangement is referenced on the bottom of the second page of the new hire packet. It is referenced as a memorandum of understanding. We are told to never repeat anything we see or hear in the air to anyone outside the company. The new hire packet uses the phrase strict liability twice and the phrase federal exposure once. The first time you sign a packet like that, you assume the legal team is just being thorough. The second packet you sign, on your 1-year renewal, you start to realize the legal team is preparing for something specific. I have worked there since 2020. I started as a junior tandem at 28, and now I am 33, which makes me one of the youngest senior instructors on the strip. There are 11 of us. There used to be 15. The first thing I want to tell you about the 4 who left is that none of them quit. The company doesn't really have a mechanism for quitting. You can ask to be transferred to one of the office roles, and they'll do it once or twice, but if you keep asking, they'll find a way to make it your idea to leave the contract early, and they'll buy out the rest of your year, and you'll sign a folder of paperwork the size of a city phone book, and you'll get a nice severance, and you'll never work in tandem operations in this country again. That's not a threat. That's just how the industry is structured. There are maybe 9 companies in North America that pay this well, and they all know each other, and the non-competes are written by the same firm in Las Vegas. The firm has a name on the letterhead that ends in LLP, and one of the partners has retired Air Force on his bio, and that is the closest thing the industry has to a hint about who is actually paying the bills. The 4 who left, all of them left medical. 2 of them looked up. I'm not supposed to know that. The official explanation for both was vertigo, which is a real thing, and which can absolutely end your jump career, and which the company is required to disclose to insurance even though they hate to. The other 2 went out for what they called acute altitude response, which is a diagnosis the company invented and which the FAA does not formally recognize, but which we are all told to use in incident reports because it sounds clinical and contains the word altitude. I know the 2 who looked up because Hollis told me. Hollis is the most senior instructor on the strip. He's been jumping since 1994. He has somewhere north of 14,000 jumps logged, and he has been working for Apex since the company started, which was 2011. He used to be Army, then he flew smoke jumpers in Idaho. Then he had 2 ugly years where he doesn't tell anyone what he was doing, and then he came here. He looks like a man you've seen in commercials. White hair, sun damage, a face that's mostly cheekbones and squint lines. He has a slow voice and he doesn't say more than he means. The first month I worked here, Hollis told me 3 things, and he made me repeat them back to him before he would sign off on my probationary status. 1. The altimeter is always right, even when it's wrong. If If it disagrees with your watch, trust the altimeter. If it disagrees with your eyes, trust the altimeter. If it disagrees with the GPS, trust the altimeter. The altimeter is the only instrument in this operation that does not lie. 2. Talk to your client through the entire descent. Not because they need to hear you, because the talking gives your jaw something to do and keeps you from looking up out of reflex when something unusual happens in your peripheral vision. 3. If you ever see a shape above the jump line, you do not tell anyone but me. You do not tell the pilot. You do not tell the client. You do not put it on the incident form. You do not call dispatch. You walk into my office, you close the door, and you sit down. That's it. The company will handle the rest. The company will be very kind to you. The company will protect you. But you only tell me, and you only tell me once. I asked him why. He looked at me for what felt like a long time, and then he said, because the people who say it twice don't come back from the second jump. He did not say it like he was being mysterious. He said it the way you might say, the heater in cabin 3 is broken, don't put a honeymoon in there. It was operational information. It was the boring kind of truth that men like Hollis communicate when they trust you enough to assume you'll do something useful with it. I did not understand him for a long time. I did not understand him for almost 4 years. For the first 2 of those years, nothing interesting happened. I had 941 tandem descents in that period, which is a high count, and the only injury I had was a sprained ankle on a hard landing that wasn't my fault. The only client incident I had was a woman from Dubai who threw up inside her own helmet during Freefall and inhaled some of it, which is one of the worst things that can happen to a person on a jump, and which she handled with more dignity than I would have. I got my senior certification. I got a raise to $150,000 a year plus housing, which is more money than my father made in his life. I started seeing one of the lodge bartenders, which is against company policy, but which the company doesn't enforce as long as you don't make a scene. Her name is Marin, and she is from Reno, and she has opinions about every aircraft that lands at the Strip, and she said something to me in our second month that I think about a lot now. She said, the planes that fly the late jumps don't sound right. This was at the bar after her shift, and I assumed it was bartender talk. I asked her what she meant. She said the engine sounded fine, but the air around the engine sounded wrong. She said when the Twin Otters take off in the morning, the air pushes away from them the way air is supposed to, but when they come back in late, after the sunset jumps, there's a noise like the air is being pulled toward them instead. She said it was a sucking sound. She said she'd asked one of the line crew about it, and the line crew had told her she was hearing the wind through the hangars and she should stop staying so late. I told her she was probably hearing the wind through the hangars. She told me she'd grown up on an air base and she knew what the wind sounded like through hangars, and I should kiss her and shut up. So I did. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that the signs were there for a long time. They were always there. I just didn't have the language for them, and the company didn't want me to. The first thing I noticed myself was the count. Free fall from 12,500 feet, accounting for the deceleration as you approach terminal velocity, lasts somewhere between 58 and 62 seconds before you deploy at 5,000. From 18,000, it's about 90 seconds. From 25,000, it's just under 2 minutes. We rehearse the numbers like prayer. You start the count the second your feet leave the door. You don't trust your sense of time. You trust the count and the altimeter in that order. The count is for your inner ear. The altimeter is for the truth. In late February of 2023, I jumped a corporate group from 12,500 and my count hit 72 before I deployed. I know it hit 72 because I was saying it out loud. I said 60, I said 65, I said 70. The altimeter said 5,000, and I deployed, and we swung up, and the chute filled, and I looked at the altimeter again, and it said 4,800. I had been in free fall for 72 seconds from 12,500 feet. That math doesn't work. The terminal velocity of two adults in tandem configuration is somewhere around 120 miles per hour, and the math is the math. While the chute was full and we were swinging, my jaw locked, not from cold. The molars on the left side felt like they were being pressed together by a thumb. The roof of my mouth went numb in a small circle behind my front teeth, the size of a dime. My right ear popped twice without equalizing. I worked the jaw loose with my tongue. The pressure stayed for about a minute under canopy, and then it left, and I have never told anyone about it. I landed. I told the client he'd had a great jump. I tipped the videographer. I walked to the office. I did not go to Hollis. I went to operations, which is a small room off the main hangar where the dispatcher sits in front of 3 monitors and a coffee pot. The dispatcher was a woman named Greta, who was about 55, who had been a controller at McCarran for 20 years before she came out to the Strip. She was the kind of person who did not panic. I told her about the count. I asked her to pull the GPS track from the jump. She looked at me for a second, and then she pulled it. The GPS track showed a normal jump. Exit at 12,500, deployment at 5,000, total free fall time of 59.4 seconds. I told her I'd counted to 72. She said, "You miscounted." I told her I'd said the numbers out loud. I told her the videographer would have it on tape. I told her the client would remember. She said, "You miscounted." She said it the 3rd time slower, and I understood that we were no longer in a conversation. She was telling me a thing that was about to become the official record. I went to find Hollis at the end of my shift. I knocked on his office door. He was at his desk with a sandwich and a Coors Light and a stack of incident reports. He looked at me. He didn't say anything. I sat down. I told him about the count. He chewed his sandwich. He took a sip of his beer. He said, "Did you look up?" I said no. He said, "Are you sure?" I said yes. He said, "Good." He set down the sandwich. He said, "The count thing happens. It's been happening more lately. We don't know why. The GPS is right, and the altimeter is right, and the count is wrong, and that means something about how your brain is processing the descent is wrong. But it doesn't mean anything happened to you. Do you understand the difference?" I told him I did. He said, "The only thing I want you to do is, the next time you have a long count, you tell me, not Greta, me. And you do not write it down anywhere except in your own notebook at home, and you do not show me that notebook." I told him I understood. He said, "You're a good instructor. Don't make me lose you." I went back to the lodge that night and Marin had made dinner in our cabin. She was already eating when I came in. I sat down. I picked up my fork. I put it down. I picked it back up. I ate without tasting anything for a long time. She did not ask me what was wrong. She had figured out early on that there were nights I would talk about the Strip and nights I would not. We finished the meal. She put the plates in the sink. She came back to the table and put her hand on the back of my neck and held it there for about a minute. That was all. We went to bed at 9. I lay on my back in the dark and did not sleep until 2. I told her about the count the next morning. She did not tell me I was being silly. She said, "How many times has that happened?" I told her once. She said, "It'll happen again." It does that. I asked her what she meant by that. She said, "The people up here, the ones who've been here a long time, they don't talk about it when they're sober, but they talk about it when they're not. The count gets longer, the sky looks wrong, the radios pick up things that aren't there." I asked her to tell me one. She said one of the pilots, a man named Jerry Tasker, was on his way back from a sunset run in the fall of 2022, and his co-pilot saw something at the 8 o'clock position about 3,000 feet above them. They were at 14,000, climbing back to base. The co-pilot said it was a shape, not a plane. The co-pilot said it didn't move. Jerry banked the otter to take a look, and the shape was gone by the time he came around. Jerry filed a report because he thought it was a drone, and drones at altitude are a federal matter, and the company killed the report before it left the office. The co-pilot quit 2 weeks later. He works at a Cessna dealership in Flagstaff now. I asked her how she knew the dealership. She said, because his wife still calls me sometimes to ask if anyone else has seen anything. That was the first night I didn't sleep well at the Strip. I lay in bed and I thought about the count. I thought about the 72 seconds and the 59.4. The difference was 12.6 seconds, which is exactly the time it would take to fall from terminal velocity through about 2,000 vertical feet. The next 3 weeks were normal. In the third week of March, a client of mine deployed at 4,500 instead of the standard 5,000. The altimeter on my chest pack disagreed with my altimeter on my wrist by 500 feet for the entire freefall. They had agreed before exit. They had been calibrated together that morning. They disagreed in the air. I trusted the chest pack because that's what I'd been trained to do, and we landed without incident. When the gear came back to the shop for inspection, the chest pack altimeter read 500 feet too high on the bench test. The mechanic recalibrated it. He wrote in the log that it had probably been bumped during gearing up, although the case had no marks on it. I asked him if he saw that kind of drift very often. He said not often, twice a year maybe. He'd seen it 3 times this year already, and we were 11 weeks in. A week after that, a client of one of my co-workers, a man named Dustin, came back from a halo jump from 24,000 feet with both ears bleeding. The medical explanation was pressure-related. The client did not file a complaint. The client did say in the debrief that he had heard a sound during freefall that was not the wind. He described it as a low pulse. He said it sounded like something very large breathing slowly above him. Dustin came to find me the next day. We met at the back of the maintenance shed where the smokers go. He said, the client said he heard breathing. I said I read the report. He said I heard it too. I asked him to repeat that. He said I heard it during the freefall. I thought it was him. But the mask was sealed and I could see his diaphragm moving and his breathing was not in time with the sound I heard. The sound I heard was slower. So slow that I only noticed 3 of them in the whole freefall. It sounded like it was coming from above me. He said this in the same voice you would use to describe a bad meal. He was not panicking. Dustin doesn't panic. Dustin has more jumps than I do. I asked him if he was going to tell Hollis. He said no. He said he was telling me because he wanted to know if I'd ever heard anything like that. I told him I hadn't. He said, you will. The next morning, Dustin was in the duty rotation, but he did not show up for the duty rotation. His cabin was empty. His personal vehicle was gone. The line manager said Dustin had requested a personal leave at 3 in the morning, which the company had granted. I tried to call Dustin. The number was disconnected. That same morning, before I had even finished my coffee, dispatch put me on the 8 o'clock lift. The lift I was supposed to have was the 10:30. The 8 o'clock had been Dustin's. Nobody asked me if I wanted it. The gear was already laid out with my name on the tag. I went up. The client was a man in his 50s from a hedge fund in Dallas, and he was nervous in the way men get nervous when they are not used to admitting they are nervous. He talked the whole climb. I do not remember anything he said. I remember the smell of the cabin, which was hot oil and rubber, and the slight sweet chemical smell of a new headset cable that is not finished outgassing. We exited at 12,500. My scalp went hot at 3 seconds. I do not know how else to describe it. A wash of heat starting at the crown of my head and moving down to the base of my skull, the way a hand would move if a hand were warm and had set itself flat on the back of my head. It was not the air. The air at 12,500 in late March is 20 degrees colder than the ground. My scalp was hot under the helmet pad, and I could feel my hair, which is short, standing up against the foam. I kept counting. At 15 seconds, I felt my inner ear tilt, the way it tilts when an elevator stops too fast. There was no elevator. There was only the column of air and the desert and the client and me. The horizon stayed where the horizon was supposed to be. My eyes told me I was falling straight. My inner ear told me I was rotating very slowly around an axis that ran from my sternum to my back. I kept counting. At 20 seconds, the static came. A buzzing sheet of it laid across my scalp from temple to temple, and the fingertips inside my gloves went numb in a way that did not feel like cold. They felt like the gloves had become hollow. I kept counting. At 30 seconds, the pressure came back to my teeth. Just the left side, just the molars. The same thumb pressing the same place, harder this time. My sternum started to hum. A low, steady vibration sitting in the bone where the harness pressed against it, and it was not coming from the harness, because the harness was not vibrating. I kept counting. At 40, I tasted aluminum at the back of my throat. Not metal exactly. The taste you get when you bite a foil wrapper and it touches your filling. I had filled a tooth 2 years ago. The filling was on the right side. The taste was coming from somewhere else. I deployed at 5,000 on the count. The chute opened clean. The pressure on my teeth let go. The heat at the back of my head went. The static in my scalp drained out the back of my neck in one slow rinse. The taste stayed for about another 90 seconds and then it faded. I landed. The client laughed and told me it was the best decision he had ever made. I drove him to the van. I went straight from the van to my next briefing. The schedule had me on the 10:30 as well, which meant they had not given Dustin's lift to me. They had added it to me. I was on 3 lifts that day. I did all 3. I did not have time to tell anyone what had happened on the first one, and by the third one I was so far inside the routine that the first one felt like something that had happened to someone else. That is the day I want you to remember. That is the day the company learned it could pour something through me and I would keep working. Because the only thing harder than what was happening in the air was sitting still on the ground and admitting it. I want to slow down here because what I am about to tell you about happened over the course of about 4 months, and if I tell it too fast, it will sound like a story I am making up. The strip got quieter that spring, not literally. The flight schedule was full. The clients kept coming. The twin otters kept climbing. What got quieter was the people. The eye contact at briefings got shorter. The smoke breaks behind the maintenance shed got longer and got more silent. 2 of the line crew started carrying their radios clipped to their collars instead of their belts, so they could hear the chatter without tilting their heads down to check it. I understood, even though nobody said it, that they were also doing it so they would not have to look up at the sky when the radio crackled. I started doing it too. I want to talk about the manifest. The manifest is a digital document that lives on the operations server. Every morning, the dispatcher prints a hard copy and pins it to the corkboard in the briefing room. It lists every passenger and crew member on every aircraft for the day. It is sacred in the same way the altimeter is sacred. You do not modify the manifest. If a client changes their package, the dispatcher modifies the manifest and prints a new one, and the old one goes in a shredder bin. There is never more than 1 copy of the day's manifest on the corkboard at any time. In the 2nd week of April, I came in for my 5:30 briefing, and the manifest had 8 names on it for my first lift. My lift was a twin otter rated for 7 passengers and 2 crew. I counted the names twice. 8 passengers, 2 crew, 10 people. The otter holds 9. I asked Greta about it. She looked at the corkboard. She said, "That's not what I printed." I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "I am sure because I printed 8 names on it, 7 clients and 1 videographer." The manifest had 8 clients and 1 videographer. The 8th client's name was Robert Allen Tess. There was no Robert Allen Tess in the lodge. There was no Robert Allen Tess in the reservation system. There was no Robert Allen Tess in any of the previous month's manifests. He existed only on that single sheet of paper, in a font that looked just like the rest, in a row that was indistinguishable from the rows above it. Greta took the manifest off the corkboard. She put it in the shredder bin. She printed a new one with 7 clients and 1 videographer. I asked her if she'd seen anything like that before. She paused. She said, once, about a year ago. The name was different. She didn't remember the name. She remembered it was a name she didn't know, and the row was at the bottom of the list, and there was no jump for the person, because the lift only had room for what had been there before. I asked her if she'd told anyone. She said, I tell Hollis. I always tell Hollis. I did my lift. The 7 clients had a normal jump. The afternoon was clear and warm, and the desert was the color of dust and rust. And when I landed, I sat in the back of the van for a long time and looked at the sky over the strip, and I tried to convince myself that nothing was wrong. The sky was bigger than it had been the day before. I want to say that very carefully. The sky did not get physically larger. What I mean is that when I looked up at the sky from the back of that van, I had the feeling of standing at the edge of something I had previously thought of as a ceiling, and realizing that it was not a ceiling and that nothing was. The sky did not feel like a thing above me. It felt like a direction. I had not had that feeling about the sky before, and once I had it, I could not unhave it. And for the next several weeks, I had to actively decide not to look up while I was walking from the lodge to the hangar. Because if I forgot to look forward, I would find myself with my head tilted back and my mouth open and my breathing shallow, and I would not remember tilting my head back. I started keeping the notebook Hollis had told me to keep. I bought it at a gas station in Beatty. It was a Mead composition book with a black and white cover and 100 pages, and I wrote in it in pen because I did not want anything I wrote to be erasable. After about a week, the notebook had 30 pages of entries, and I started to see patterns I had not seen before. The count irregularities happened mostly on afternoon and evening jumps, not morning. The altimeter drifts happened mostly above 15,000 feet. The auditory phenomena, the breathing or the pulsing, happened mostly when the air was very still. The manifests had only ever been wrong on days when one of our twin otters was running ferry flights to a second strip that the company maintained near the Utah border. A second strip I had never been to. The second strip is called Ridgeline North on the internal documents. It is about 220 miles northeast of our main operation, in a part of Nevada that is mostly nothing. We use it for what the company calls extended packages. Ridgeline North has a King Air 350i instead of a Twin Otter, and it can take you to 28,000 feet. The clients who go there sign additional waivers and pay additional money. None of the instructors at our main strip are rated for Ridgeline North. The Ridgeline crew is its own crew. They do not come down to us. We do not go up to them. The ferry flights I'd mentioned were our Twin Otters going up to Ridgeline North, empty, dropping off supplies and coming back. They happened about once every 3 weeks. On the days they happened, the manifest had a section at the bottom labeled ferry that listed the pilot, the co-pilot, and the cargo. That was the section where the extra names showed up. There had been 3 extra names in the last 14 months. All 3 of them had been in the ferry section. I asked Marin about Ridgeline North. She said the crew up there didn't come down because they didn't come down anymore. She said one of them had come down once, about 2 years ago, and had taken a job at the lodge as a maintenance hand. He had not gone back up. He had quit after a month and gone home to wherever he was from. She said he had told her, on the night he quit, that the planes at Ridgeline did not fly the same air the planes at our strip flew. I asked her what he meant. She said she didn't ask, because she could tell from his face that asking was not what he needed her to do. I want to tell you about the jump in May. It was a sunset lift from 12,500 feet. I had one client, a woman in her early 30s from Los Angeles. The videographer was a man named Ellis. Ellis had been at the company about 10 months. He was a former skateboarder who had moved into action cam work after a knee injury, and he had a steady mid-air shot that the clients loved. We exited at 12,500. At about 7 seconds in, I noticed Ellis was not where Ellis was supposed to be. The videographer in a tandem operation flies above and slightly to the side of the tandem pair, with the camera angled down and slightly inward. Ellis was a habit on this position. He flew it like he was on a track. That evening, Ellis was below us. I saw him out of the corner of my eye at the 4 o'clock, falling at what looked like the same speed we were falling. His camera was up. He was filming us from below. I almost said something on the helmet radio. I caught myself. We landed normally. Canopy opened at 5,000. The client laughed and cried and hugged me. Ellis was already at the strip. He had landed before us. I asked him about the position. He looked at me like I had asked him a question in a language he didn't speak. He said, "What position?" I said, "You were below us. You filmed from underneath." He said, "No, I didn't." I asked him to pull the footage. He pulled the footage. The footage was normal. It was filmed from above and slightly to the side. My client's face was in the upper third of the frame. Ellis had been exactly where Ellis was supposed to be. I looked at the timestamp. I looked at the altitude readout that was burned into the corner of the video. Everything matched a normal jump. There was no footage of the position I had seen. I went back to my cabin and I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I tried to recall what I had seen. I tried to picture Ellis at the 4 o'clock below us. I could picture him very clearly. The helmet, the black camera rig, the angle of the camera up toward us, the blue around him. I tried to picture his face. I could not picture his face. I could picture a helmet and a body and a posture, and the posture was correct for Ellis, and the gear was correct for Ellis, and the way the camera was held was correct for Ellis, but I could not picture the face under the visor. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about it long enough that the room got dark and I had not turned on the light. I did not write down what I think now, which is that the figure I saw at the 4 o'clock was not below us at all. It was above us, and I was seeing it wrong because of where my brain wanted to put it. I could not have it above me. I could not let it be above me, so I put it below. I want to tell you what happened on June 7th of 2023, because that is the day the story stopped being a thing that was happening at the company and became a thing that was happening to me. I was on a midday tandem from 12,500, a clear day, wind from the southwest at 6 knots. My client was a software developer from Austin who was celebrating his 40th birthday. The freefall started normally. I called out the altitudes. He held his arch. The desert below us was bright. The sky above was the kind of blue you don't usually see at altitude. It was just blue. A flat blue that looked like a wall. At about 20 seconds in, I heard a voice on the helmet radio. The voice was mine. I do not mean it sounded like mine. I mean it was mine. The way the voice on your voicemail is yours. The way the recording of yourself you cannot stand to listen to is yours. It was the voice I had been calling altitudes in for the last 2.5 years. The voice said, "Are you sure you're still falling?" It said it once, calmly, the way I would say it, with the same small upward lift at the end of a question that I have when I am asking a client to confirm something during the climb. There was no static around it. There was no engine sound behind it. It was the kind of clean you only get when the sound is sitting directly in your ear. The skin between my shoulder blades went tight, the way it goes when someone walks up close behind you in an empty hallway. My fingertips lost feeling for 1 full second and then came back. I did not respond. I did not key the mic. I did not break the count. I kept counting. 40, 45, 50. The altimeter read 7,000, then 6,500, then 6,000. The client's hands were where the client's hands were supposed to be. At 55 seconds, I deployed. The chute opened. The roar of the air died into that pop and that silence that happens under canopy. The silence that feels like someone has closed a door on the outside world. The client said something that was either a curse word or a prayer. I could not tell which. I keyed my mic on the descent. I said, "Cole, did you hear anything on the radio at 20 seconds?" Cole said, "No." Cole said, "Why?" I said, "No reason." We landed. The client kissed the ground. He gave me a $500 tip in cash. I went back to the gear room. I took off my helmet. I sat on the bench and I held the helmet in my lap, and I looked at the inside of the helmet, at the little gray foam pads against the side of my head, and I thought about my own voice asking me if I was sure I was still falling. I did not write it in the notebook that night. I did not write it for a week. If I put it on paper, it would become a fact, and I needed it to not be a fact for as long as I could keep it from being a fact. Panic compression. Anomaly stacked on anomaly, no decompression. 11 days after the jump on June 7th, on the morning of June 18th, I came in for the 5:30 briefing. The manifest was on the corkboard. I read down my lift. 2 clients, 1 videographer, standard. I turned to walk into the briefing room. I turned back. I read down the manifest again, the whole thing, every lift, every name. There were 6 lifts that day, and I read every name on every lift, and at the bottom of the 3rd lift on the ferry line, in the cargo column, was my name. First, middle, last. Exactly as it appeared on my employment paperwork. Exactly as it appeared on my certifications. The font was the company font. The line was indistinguishable from any other line on the manifest. There was a tail number next to it. There was a destination next to it. The destination was Ridgeline North. I was not on the ferry rotation. I had never been on the ferry rotation. I was not even qualified for the ferry rotation. I went to Greta. I pointed at it. She looked at it for a long time. She did not speak. She unpinned the manifest from the board. She did not put it in the shredder bin. She folded it twice into a small square, and she put the square inside her wallet, and she put her wallet back in her purse. She printed a new manifest. The new manifest did not have my name on the ferry line. She said, "You are not flying ferry today." I said, "I know." She said, "You are not flying ferry ever." I said, "I know." She said, "I am keeping that one. Do not ask me why." I did not ask her why. I walked out of the operations office and into the hallway that connects to the gear room, and the helmet radio on the charging dock at the end of the hallway crackled once, just once. Half a second of carrier hiss. The radio's indicator light was off. The radio was not plugged in. I knew the radio was not plugged in because the line crew never plugged the chargers in overnight after a fire scare in 2022. I stood in the hallway and looked at the radio. The radio did it again, the same half second of hiss. The light stayed off. I walked past it. I did not stop. I did not pick it up. I went out the back door onto the apron, and the air on the apron was very still. The way air gets when a front is coming through but has not arrived yet, except there was no front on the forecast. Greta came out behind me about 30 seconds later. She did not say anything. She handed me a cup of coffee from the break room pot. She drank from her own cup. We stood on the apron and we looked at the south runway, and we did not look up. She said, "The printer in operations printed a second copy of the manifest while I was watching it." I said, "What?" She said, "I had already printed the new one. The one without your name." I was holding the new one in my hand. The printer started up by itself and printed the old one again. The same one. Your name on the ferry line. Same tail number. Same destination. I said, "Where is it?" She said, "In my purse, with the other one." She drank her coffee. Her hand was steady. Mine was not. I think she was keeping it the way you keep evidence that a person existed before they stopped existing. I think she had done it before. I think the wallet in her purse had more than 1 square of paper in it. I did my lifts that day. I did not jump ferry. But I sat in the back of the van on the way back from my second lift, and I felt, for the first time, the very specific feeling of having been noticed. Not watched. Noticed. The way a name on a list feels different from a face in a crowd. That night I sat on the porch of our cabin with Marin. We did not talk. She watched the hangars. The floodlights came on at 7:45 with that little sodium hum that you only hear if you are paying attention. The twin otters were back in for the night. The line crew had gone home. Marin held my hand. After about 20 minutes, she said, "What is it?" I told her, all of it. The voice, the manifest, the square of paper in Greta's wallet, the radio in the hallway. She did not say anything for a long time, and then she said, "We need to start thinking about where we are going to live when we leave here." I told her I had been thinking about that for 2 weeks. She said, "Good. Start thinking harder. I want to tell you about Hollis now." Hollis had been at the Strip for the entire time I had been there, and he had been there for 9 years before me. He worked more days than any other instructor. He ate breakfast in the lodge every morning at 5:15. In the first week of June, Hollis stopped going to the lodge for breakfast. It was not dramatic, he just stopped. The first day I noticed it was a Thursday. The third day I noticed it, I went to his office and knocked on the door and went in. He was sitting at his desk. He had a sandwich from a gas station and a thermos and a stack of paperwork. He looked tired in a way I had not seen on him before. I asked him if he was okay. He said, "Sit down." I sat down. He said, "I want to tell you something that I have not told anyone else at this company." I waited. He said, 3 weeks ago, I looked up. He had been on a sunrise tandem from 12,500 feet with a regular client. The client had said something during the climb, a small joke, a thing about how the morning air smelled like aluminum. Hollis had not thought about it during the climb. Hollis had thought about it after they exited. Aluminum is what the air smells like when you are very close to something metallic and very large. The thought made Hollis tilt his head back. He did not do it on purpose. He did it the way you scratch your nose when you do not realize you have an itch. His helmet shifted. The sky came into the upper edge of his vision and then into the center of his vision, and Hollis, after 30 years of professional discipline, looked up. He said he saw it for about half a second. He would not describe what it was. He said the word he kept reaching for was edge, but that edge was not the right word, because edge implies that the thing has another side. He said it was very far above him, and it was much larger than he could process. And he had the very clear sensation that it was aware of him in a way that did not require it to look. He said he looked back down within half a second. He said he believed that half a second saved his life. He said he had not slept more than 3 hours a night since. He said he was leaving. He had given the company 30 days' notice. He was going to move to his daughter's house in Bend, Oregon. He said, "Do not look up. Not for any reason. Not because you think you have to. Not because something falls in your peripheral vision. Not because the client points. Not because the radio is screaming. Do not look up." I told him I wouldn't. He said, "I know you won't, but say it again anyway." I said it again. He said, "Good." He drank from his thermos. He went back to his paperwork. I walked out of his office and the Strip looked exactly the same as it had looked 20 minutes before. Nothing at the Strip had changed and everything in my body had. Hollis left on the 2nd of July. The replacement they brought in was a man named Sutter. He was 44. He had come from a similar operation in New Zealand. He was friendly. He smiled at the right times. He was a competent instructor and a good colleague, and I did not like him, and I could not say why I did not like him until about a month after he arrived. The thing I did not like about him was that he did not look at the sky. The rest of us, even those of us who obeyed the rule, looked at the sky. We looked at it on the apron in the morning to see if there were clouds. We looked at it under canopy. The rule is about looking up during freefall, not about ignoring the sky in general. Sutter never looked at the sky. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at the aircraft. He looked at his shoes when he walked. He looked at me when I talked to him. He never, in the 8 months he was with us, that I observed, tilted his head back to look at the sky. I asked him once, casually, on the apron during a slow afternoon, whether he thought the weather would hold. He looked at his watch and said, "The forecast says the weather will hold." I said, "But how does it look to you?" He said, "The forecast says the weather will hold." I dropped it. The summer of 2023 was when the jumps started getting longer. After Hollis left, the counts started going long for everyone. Not every jump, maybe 1 in 12. The morning jumps were always exactly the right length. The midday jumps would sometimes go 3 or 4 seconds long. The sunset jumps could go 20 seconds long. The night jumps were the worst. I had a night jump in August. The package was a halo from 24,000 feet. Oxygen, full thermal gear, 2 clients in tandem, one with me and one with an instructor named Petra. The jump was over the dry lake. The moon was almost full. The desert was silver. We exited at 24,000 and the free fall was supposed to take about 115 seconds. I counted to 174 before I deployed. I did not panic. I did not look up. I kept counting and I kept checking the altimeter and I kept talking to my client. At about 90 seconds, I felt a vibration in my chest. Not a heart vibration. A vibration in the bone of my sternum, the way a phone vibrates on a wood table. It was steady. It had a rhythm. The rhythm did not match my heart. The rhythm did not match anything in my body. The rhythm was slow, and it was outside me, and it was passing through me from above. At 110 seconds, the pressure behind my eyes changed. Both eyes at once, the way they change in an airliner during a hard descent, except we were already at terminal velocity, and there was nowhere left to descend toward. The skin behind my ears went cold in 2 small circles the size of nickels. I deployed at the altimeter. The chute opened. The vibration stopped. The pressure behind my eyes equalized in 1 slow second. The count had been 59 seconds too long. Petra deployed about 2 seconds after I did. I saw her canopy open below mine. We landed about 200 yards apart. The recovery van came out. In the van, Petra asked me what my count had been. I told her 174. She said mine was 173. We did not say anything else in the van. We did not say anything else in the debrief. That night, after the lodge had closed, Petra came to find me on the porch of my cabin. She had a bottle of Slivovitz and 2 glasses. We drank in silence for a while. She said, "Do you think it knows our names?" I said, "What knows our names?" She looked at me like I was being deliberate. I said, "I don't know." She said, "I think it does. I think it has known mine for a long time." I asked her what she meant. She told me she had been having a dream every night for the past month. In the dream, she was in Freefall. She was alone. There was no client and no parachute. She was in her jumpsuit and her helmet, and she was falling at terminal velocity, and the sky above her was open and clear, and she could see for what felt like hundreds of miles in every direction except up. The dream always ended the same way. She would feel that she was being looked at. She would understand that something was looking at her from somewhere very far above her. She would feel her neck want to tilt back. She would wake up. She said, "Last night, in the dream, I tilted my head a little, just a few degrees, not enough to see anything, just enough to know that I could." She said, "I do not think I will jump again." She did not jump again. She put in for a transfer to ground operations the next morning. The company gave it to her without a fight. They moved her to dispatch. She works with Greta now. The week after Petra moved to dispatch, the videographers started reporting that their footage was coming back with extra frames. The cameras we use are professional rigs that record at 60 frames per second. The video files are processed on-site at the Strip in a small editing suite by 2 staff editors named Ren and Mark. In the second week of September, Ren called me into the editing suite. He had something he wanted to show me. I sat down at his workstation. He pulled up a clip from a tandem jump that had happened the day before. He played it at normal speed. It looked normal. He played it again at quarter speed. It looked normal. He played it again at 16th speed. He pointed at the upper edge of the frame, at the patch of sky directly above the falling pair. He said, "Watch the right side." I watched. At about 3 seconds into the clip, at the upper right corner of the frame, for 2 frames, something flickered. 2 frames at 16th speed is barely a 30th of a second at normal speed. It was not a shape. I could not have told you it was a shape. It was an absence. It was a patch of sky that looked like the rest of the sky but felt like it had been added on top of the rest of the sky, like a sticker that had been applied poorly. Ren said, "That's in every clip, from every camera, from every jump in the last 3 weeks." I said, "What does it look like at full resolution?" He said, "That is full resolution." He said, "When you slow it down, it gets harder to see, not easier. The faster you play it, the more it almost looks like nothing. The slower you play it, the more you can feel that it isn't nothing." He said the file size for those 2 frames was the same as the file size for every other frame in the clip, which meant the camera had recorded the same amount of information. It just was not information he could read. I asked him if he had told anyone. He said, "I told Mark. Mark doesn't want to know." I asked him why he had shown me. He said, "Because Hollis told me before he left that you were the one I could show." I asked him, "What do you think it is?" He said, "I think it's the camera trying to record something the camera was not built for." I left the editing suite. I went back to my cabin. I sat on the porch in the dark. I tried to quit the next day. I went to the operations office. I told Greta I wanted to put in for a contract termination. She looked at me for a long time. She handed me a form. I filled it out. I checked the box for personal medical. I signed it. I dated it. I put it in the slot on her desk. The next morning, my form was on my desk in the briefing room. It was unsigned by management. There was a sticky note on it that said, "Please come see me after your morning lift." The note was signed by the operations manager, a man named Corin, who had run the strip since 2017. I did my morning lift. The count was right. The altimeter was right. The client landed laughing. I went to Corin's office. Corin was a thin man with white hair and a face that did not give you anything. He looked like a retired Coast Guard officer, which is what he was. He did not stand when I came in. He gestured at the chair. I sat. He said, "You do not want to terminate your contract?" I said, "I do." He said, "You do not want to terminate your contract because if you do, you will go home, and you will have nothing to do, and you will sit in your home, and you will think about what you saw, and what you almost saw, and what you might have seen. The people who terminate their contracts do not do well in their homes." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Here you are with people who know. You can talk to Greta, you can talk to Petra, you can talk to Ren, you can talk to me. If you go home, you cannot talk to anyone because there is no one to talk to. The company is not asking you to keep jumping. The company is asking you to stay close to the people who can keep you from being alone with what you know." I asked him what I knew. He said, "You know that the sky is not empty. That is enough." I asked him if I had to keep jumping. He said, "No. We will move you to ground operations effective immediately, if that is what you want. We will keep your salary. We will keep your housing. You can stay at the strip and you can stop jumping." I sat for a long time. I told him I needed to think about it. He said, "Take as long as you need. Do not jump again until you have decided. We will cover your slots." I walked out. That afternoon I drove out to the dry lake. The dry lake is about 8 miles north of the strip. It is a flat expanse of cracked white clay about 6 miles long and 3 miles wide. There is no one out there. There are no buildings. There are no fences. There is just the lake and the mountains around it and the sky. I drove my truck out onto the lake. I parked. I shut the engine off. The silence that comes when you shut an engine off in the middle of a dry lake is not like other silences. There is no echo. There is no nearby surface for sound to bounce off. Your ears, after a while, start filling in the silence with the sound of your own blood. I got out. I walked away from the truck until the truck was a small thing behind me. I lay down on my back on the clay. I looked up. I looked up for what I think was about 30 minutes, although I had not brought a watch. I looked at the sky in the middle of the afternoon in early September, in the Nevada desert, from flat on my back, on a dry lake bed 8 miles from the nearest other person. I saw nothing. The sky was blue. It was the color blue that the sky is in the desert in the afternoon. There were 2 contrails very high up that were almost dissolved. There was a hawk far to the north that I watched for a minute and then could not see anymore. But the longer I looked, the more I felt that what I was looking at was not empty. I had the very precise sense that the blue I was looking at was a surface and that there was something behind the surface. I had the sense that whatever was behind the surface was aware of me. I had the sense that it was aware of me because I was lying flat, because my throat was exposed, because my whole body was pointed straight up at it. The skin across my scalp went tight. The hair on my forearms stood up under my sleeves. There was a low static in the back of my jaw that I had felt twice before in the air. The taste of aluminum came back into my mouth. My fingertips went cold in a way that did not match the temperature of the clay under my hands. I closed my eyes. I lay there with my eyes closed for what I think was another 15 minutes. I felt watched the way you feel watched when you wake up in a room and someone you love is standing at the end of the bed because they are worried about you and they did not want to wake you. Except whatever was watching me did not love me and would not have minded waking me at all. I got up. I walked back to the truck. I drove back to the strip. I did not look up on the drive. I told Corin that night that I would take the ground operations position. He nodded. He shook my hand. He said, "You made the right call." I worked ground operations for the rest of 2023. I worked with Greta and Petra in dispatch. I helped with manifest preparation, gear inspection, client briefings, and on slow days, I helped Ren in the editing suite. I did not jump again. They paid me my full instructor salary. They let me keep my cabin. Marin and I moved in together in October. She did not ask why I had stopped jumping. I think she knew. In the 3rd week of November of 2023, the King Air 350I from Ridgeline North did not come back from a jump. I was on duty when the call came in. The call came in from Corin's office at about 4 in the afternoon. He came down to dispatch personally, which he did not normally do. He told Greta to clear the line. He told me to clear the briefing board. He told Petra to sit down. He said the King Air had taken off at 13:40 with 3 clients, 2 jump instructors, a videographer, and the pilot and co-pilot. 8 souls on board. It had reached its drop altitude of 27,000 feet at 1410. It had reported clients away at 1412. It had not reported pilots returning to base at 1430. The drop zone radar had tracked the 3 jump pairs through canopy deployment at 5,000 feet. All canopies had opened. All canopies had landed. All 8 people who had exited the aircraft had reached the ground. The King Air had not been on the radar after 1414. The King Air had simply gone off the screen. There had been no distress call. There had been no transponder squawk. The aircraft had been at 14,000 feet, descending normally toward Ridgeline North, and at 1414, it had not been there anymore. The clients had landed normally. The instructors had landed normally. The videographer had landed normally. None of them had seen anything unusual. Corin told us that the search and rescue had been underway for 2 hours. The Air Force was assisting. They had found nothing. No wreckage. No transponder ping, no debris on the ground for a 50-mile radius around the last known position. He said the search would be quiet. He said the family notifications would be quiet. He said the FAA was being briefed by people in Washington and not by people in Reno. He said no one at the Strip was to take a phone call from a reporter, an investigator, an attorney, or anyone identifying themselves as Air Force unless the call had been routed through the corporate office in Las Vegas first. I asked him, off the record, after the others had left dispatch, what he thought had happened to the King Air. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "I think the King Air was going home." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "I think the people who flew the King Air had been flying it for a long time, and I think they had not been alone in the air for a long time. And I think on the 2nd of November, the thing that had been flying with them decided it was done flying with them and took them with it." I asked him if the clients knew. He said no, the clients did not know. The clients had paid for a halo jump from 27,000 feet over a beautiful piece of Nevada, and they had gotten one. The clients had landed and gotten in vans and gone home. The clients did not need to know. I asked him if the company was going to keep flying out of Ridgeline North. He said no. Ridgeline North is being decommissioned. The King Air is replaced. The crew is replaced. There will be a new strip in eastern Utah by next March. I asked him if it followed the strips. He said, "I do not know." He said, "I do not think anybody knows." In the first week of December of 2023, Marin and I were on the lodge porch at about 7 in the evening. The sun was down. The desert was dark in the way the desert is dark, which is darker than people who do not live in the desert can imagine. The stars were out. The strip was quiet. There were no jumps scheduled that night. A twin otter came in to land on the south runway. There was no twin otter on the schedule. There had not been a twin otter in the air all day. The maintenance team had been working on both of our twin otters since the morning. Both aircraft were in the hangar with their cowlings off. I knew this because I had walked through the hangar before dinner. The twin otter that came in to land at 7 in the evening came in from the north, lined up on the south runway, touched down, and taxied to the apron. Its lights were correct. Its engines sounded correct mostly. There was a noise underneath the engine noise that I cannot describe to you, except to say that Marin put her hand on my arm and squeezed it harder than she had ever squeezed it before, and I knew she was hearing what she had told me about almost 2 years earlier, the sound of air being pulled toward the aircraft instead of pushed away from it. The aircraft taxied to the apron. It stopped. The engine spun down. The silence that followed was the worst silence I have ever heard. No one got out. The doors did not open. The cargo bay did not open. The pilot's window did not move. The aircraft sat on the apron for about 3 minutes. Then the engine spun back up. The aircraft taxied to the south runway. The aircraft took off. The aircraft turned north. The aircraft climbed out of sight. The next morning there was no record of the aircraft. The tower logs did not have it. The radar logs did not have it. The fuel records did not have it. The maintenance records showed both twin otters in the hangar, cowlings off, all night. Marin and I did not talk about it for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she said, "You saw it too, right?" I said, "I saw it." She said, "What was it?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I think it was practicing." She said, "Practicing what?" I said, "Being one of us." She did not ask me what I meant. I do not think she needed to. I want to tell you one more thing before I finish, because if I do not tell you this last thing, you will not understand why I am keeping this notebook in a bank vault instead of in my own house. In February of 2024, about a month after I had decided that I was going to stay on at the strip in ground operations until my contract was up and then leave quietly, I woke up at 3:11 in the morning. I know it was 3:11 because I looked at the alarm clock first. The way you look at the clock when you wake up at a wrong hour and want to know how wrong the hour is. The cabin was dark. Marin was asleep on her side facing the wall. The heater was running on low. There was a small line of light under the bedroom door, which was wrong because we did not leave any lights on at night. I lay there for a few seconds. I told myself I had left the kitchen light on. I told myself the cabin had old wiring and sometimes a switch hung up. Then I heard my voice. It was coming from the living room. It was not loud. It was the volume my voice is when I am calling altitudes for a client through a helmet radio. Calm, procedural, mid-range. I could hear every word. It was saying 12,000. It was saying 11,5. It was saying 11. It was counting me down. I lay in the bed, and I did not move. The voice was on the other side of the door, 15 feet away, in a room with no other person in it. And it was using my professional voice to walk an imaginary client down through altitudes that did not exist in a cabin that was on the ground in the desert in February. It got to 10,000. It got to 9.5. It got to 9. It did not pause between numbers. It did not hesitate. It had my cadence exactly. It had the small breath I take between thousands. It had the small upward lift I put on the half-thousands when I am trying to keep a nervous client calm. It got to 5,000. That is the altitude where I would pull. It pulled. I heard myself say, deploying. I heard the small 2-beat pause I always take while the canopy fills. I heard myself say, canopy good. Then the voice stopped. The line of light under the door stayed for another 4 or 5 seconds. Then it went out. I did not get out of bed. I did not go look. I did not turn on my own light. I lay on my back in the dark and I put my hand on Marin's hip under the blanket, because I needed to feel a person who was warm and breathing. And I lay there with my hand on her hip until the sun came up. When the sun came up, I got out of bed and I went into the living room and I looked at everything. The lamps were off, the kitchen light was off, the radio in the kitchen was unplugged, the way it always is when we are not using it, with the cord coiled on top. There were no footprints, there were no marks. The room was exactly as we had left it the night before. I did not write that in the notebook for 3 weeks. When I finally wrote it, I wrote it in pencil, which is the only entry in the notebook that is not in pen. I do not know why I did that. I think I wanted, just for that one entry, to leave a small possibility that I could go back and remove it. I have not removed it. I am writing this in the spring of 2026. I am writing it because Corin died in February. He had a heart attack in his office at 5 in the morning, and the line crew found him at the briefing. The company gave him a service at the lodge. There were 40 people there. Hollis came down from Bend for the service and did not say anything to anyone except me, and he only said, "Are you out yet?" I told him I was still at the strip, but I had not jumped in 2.5 years. He said, "That is not the same as out. Marin and I are leaving the strip in June. We are moving to a town in the Cascades where her sister lives. I do not know what I am going to do with my life after that. I am 36 years old and I have a body that has been through 1,200 jumps and a mind that has been through more than that. Final horror detonation. One last impossible event before the cooldown. 3 nights ago, I was alone in the editing suite. Ren had gone home. Mark had gone home. I was pulling the last of my personal files off the company server before my access expired at the end of the month. The suite was quiet. The monitors were down to one screen. I clicked on a folder labeled with my own employee number. I had not made the folder. I clicked it anyway. Inside the folder was a single video file, 60 seconds long. The file name was a date that was 4 days in the future. I should not have opened it. I opened it. The footage was from a videographer's helmet cam. The angle was correct for a videographer position above and slightly to the side of a tandem pair in Freefall. The desert below was the desert I knew. The altitude readout in the corner of the frame ran from 12,500 down toward 5,000 the way it always did. The tandem pair in the frame was me and a client I did not recognize. My jumpsuit, my helmet, my harness, the way I always hold my hands during the drogue phase, which is a way I have never seen anyone else hold their hands. I have not jumped in 2.5 years. The footage ran for the full 60 seconds. The count was right. The altitude was right. At 55 seconds, the figure that was me pulled. The chute filled. The camera turned, the way a videographer turns to track the deploying canopy. For 2 frames before the camera came back around to follow the canopy down, the camera tilted up. Just a little. Just a few degrees. Not enough to see anything. Just enough to know that it could. The footage ended. The file deleted itself from the folder. The folder deleted itself from the server. The screen went back to my desktop. I sat in the editing suite for a long time. I did not move. The skin between my shoulder blades was tight. My fingertips were cold. The taste of aluminum was at the back of my throat. I am writing this because I think there should be a record. The official records are owned by the company and they do not say what I am saying. I am writing this for whoever finds it. If you ever, for any reason, find yourself in free fall and the person above you tells you not to look up, you do not look up. You do not look up if your skin is on fire. You do not look up if you hear your name. You do not look up if everything in your body is telling you that something is wrong above you and you need to see it. Especially not then. The rule was written by people who looked up and survived looking up and lived long enough to tell other people to not look up. Once you have been known, you stay known. You can move to Oregon. You can move to Maine. You can move to a basement in Pittsburgh. The only thing you can do is keep your head down and keep your business small and try to be a person who is not interesting to the watcher. I have not looked up at the sky since the day on the dry lake. I drive with the visor down. I walk under awnings when I can. I keep my eyes on the road or the path or the floor. I am going to put this notebook in a safe deposit box at a bank in Carson City. I am going to tell Marin where the key is. If you are listening to this in a room at night, do me a favor. Keep your head level for the next 5 minutes. Make it the smallest habit you have. The habit might give you a few extra seconds on a night that matters when your body wants to do the wrong thing and the habit makes you do the right thing instead. That is all the rule is. A habit that gives you a few extra seconds. Use them well. I am going to stop writing now. The light outside is starting to come up over the ridge behind the strip. I can hear the line crew starting their walk down. The first lift goes up at 5:30. I am not on it. I am going to go put on coffee for Marin. I am going to sit at the kitchen table with my hands around a hot mug. I am going to look at the table. I am not going to look up. Not now. Not ever.